Meantime, inflation is affecting nearly every aspect of our lives. Prices for regular groceries and other items have soared over the past year, hitting a 40-year high. To help us break this down is Sarah Foster. She's a Federal Reserve and economy reporter at bankrate.com. Thanks for joining us this morning. So the thing about this inflation, I find, is that, how you're experiencing it depends on the products that you're trying to buy and where you live, I think, a little bit. So what are the products that are seeing sort of the prices rising the most, and where in the country are they feeling it the most?
Yeah, well, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I think you highlighted a very important part about inflation, which is that everyone has their own personal inflation rates. And it kind of depends on what you buy. But we found in our Bankrate consumer analysis that basically all of the items that are getting most expensive are those ones that everyone buys, no matter where they live, no matter how much money they make, how old they are. It's the items that you can't necessarily cut out of your budgets. And so just to kind of zoom in on some of the items that increase the most, and they might not really come as a surprise to many Americans, but we saw that at number one, the top spot is gasoline. It's up about 50% from a year ago. We also looked at 6 of the 10 most inflated items were groceries. Those include eggs, chicken, which interestingly enough, chicken is up about 17% from a year ago. And that was the biggest increase that chicken has ever seen on record.
Wow.
I think it's also, it's very fascinating to kind of look at the areas that are also getting most expensive. I think kind of looking at this data myself, I was very fascinated to know that some cities in Florida, for example, Tampa, the inflation is up about 11.3% from a year ago versus New York City, which is about 6.3% from a year ago. It's very fascinating to kind of look at all of these different areas, but kind of what, as we were talking about earlier, kind of the most heartbreaking aspect about this inflation that we're seeing right now is that there's really no way to cut gasoline or groceries out of your budget. The long running advice that, skipping a dinner out, that doesn't really apply here because you can't necessarily skip dinner.
Yeah, definitely. A Bankrate survey found that nearly 73% of Americans are worried about new or continued price increases over the next year. I'm curious about what age groups are most impacted by this.
Yeah, so we also, in that survey from March, we looked at how individuals were saying that they were impacted by inflation. And so overall, we saw that pretty close to 3 in 4 Americans were negatively impacted by higher prices, but it was definitely higher concentrated in the older generation. So just to look at baby boomers, for example, they were about 79% of them said that they were negatively impacted by inflation, along with Generation X, where 80% of them said that they were impacted by inflation. And kind of putting that in perspective, that compares with about 68% of millennials and 59% of Generation Z. And so I think while we can say that inflation is impacting these older generations more for reasons that kind of make sense, most of them, some of them could be retired, some of them could be living on fixed income, maybe approaching kind of the end of their careers, while millennials and Gen Z hopefully have lots of earning opportunities ahead of them. It's still a heartbreaking kind of figure here to look at what is getting most expensive.
Yeah. And so really quickly, is there anything that consumers can do to combat inflation?
Absolutely. And I think one thing is really important to remember, and it's kind of a rare economic environment where you're seeing one of the highest rates of inflation in 40 years, coupled with a half-century low, or at least near a half-century low unemployment and a booming job market. I think right now, we saw job openings dipped a little bit in the last report, but they're still about pretty close to 2 job openings for every unemployed worker. And what I think that gives Americans is leverage, at least, to ask for higher pay, to maybe find a more flexible position, something out there that could at least fit their needs a little bit better. In addition to maybe taking advantage of discounts that are out there. I think what's really interesting as well is that lots of retailers have kind of stockpiled on products. And so they kind of have a surplus right now, which is really interesting to kind of think about the supply chain issues. And so I think what you've started to see is that places like Target, Walmart, for example, are starting to offer discounts. So while things might be getting more expensive, there could be a little bit of ways out there that you could at least take advantage of cheaper prices.
you know what, you might have to put in a little effort in there, but if it means saving a buck here and there, all of that adds up. Sarah Foster, thank you very much.